So we'll give it a couple of minutes here.
Yeah, I'd imagine a lot of people.
Mm, there we go. Ah, this is interesting. We've got somebody dialing in through the phone. Very neat.
Very cool.
We'll just give it a few more minutes, guys. Let some other people come in.
Sweet. If it is just the phone, maybe I don't need to share the screen either.
Yep, yep. Well, let's take a look.
Or
Although,
maybe it would help. Maybe it would help for the recording.
yes, exactly.
Matt, is it windy where you are, man? I'm getting
It's
blown
really
up
windy.
here.
I think at 8:15 it's supposed to be like pretty bad here.
It's
So
crazy.
there's a chance of tornadoes tonight. I mean, well, it'll end at like maybe 9. I think it's going to get through here around 9.
Really?
Yeah, like the what I looked on the radar. So we'll see. What about
I
you
better
guys?
look. Yeah, it's
Like there's
windy
a
here.
red cell hitting here at you guys are south, so you might not get it as much. If you're north, I think Hendersonville looked like it was going to get it.
Totally fine on my side. It's been kind of balmy actually. It's been like,
I mean,
let's call it I mean balmy as in 20 degrees.
I bet
It's not too
I
bad.
bet your weather is way different than it is in Tennessee.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, it's a little soggy. Should be interesting. But yeah, let's get this rolling, guys. Like thanks
Right.
everyone for joining in and attending. This should be a really good webinar that we're gonna host here. We're gonna have a lot of interesting conversations surrounding, well, what it is to find the location and make sure it's the correct one for you. In addition to making sure that, whether you're looking to stay there for the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years, whatever the case may be, this will be the most secure, well, should be the most secure lease that you'd ever sign. So, pretty interesting turnout here that we've got. I'm going to run a poll as well to get a sense of, what's everyone's interest as far as attending the webinar. So I hope you can see it all here. So of course, my name is Jason. I'm one of the senior consultants here at Cirrus Consulting Group. And today I have the pleasure of being joined by Mike Jorgensen and Matthew Robertson of Car Realty. Gentlemen, perhaps if you can give a bit of an intro here as far as your positions at Car and your experience here.
Yeah, my name's Matt Robertson. I'm with Car Healthcare Real Estate, and our goal is to help our clients find the best deal on their real estate to make sure it's fair, and that we look out for your interest along with Cirrus Consulting here, that we make sure we find you guys the right spot, the right term, tenant improvement. We want to make sure that we're helping you guys out with that process. And I'm located here in Nashville, Tennessee. And I'm going to move on to Mike here.
Yeah, absolutely. My name's Mike Jorgensen. I am a director at Car, so my role is to do a lot of stuff like this across the country. I'm not transacting as much anymore, but we've got great agents and markets all across the country, and I'm actually here in Nashville as well. But Matt is your guy in terms of real estate. But Jason, we appreciate you having us here, man. We're looking forward to this relationship and this session specifically.
Absolutely. And yeah, I think this is a very interesting, frankly, our two businesses have fantastic synergy
Mm.
because, for the longest time, I can candidly say that, you know, there's always been a little bit of friction between the broker, also the frankly the tenant's position with the space, and also in terms of a lawyer that the tenant may be working with, and us negotiating the lease. But I really do think that our relationship is, much more symbiotic
Mm.
than it first appears. So in terms of what CAR can do as far as, helping locate the correct location and determining if it's going to be the right fit for starting a clinic, or maybe it's a second or third location or a relocation, perhaps. Perhaps you can dive into that as far as like what you should look out for as far as that's concerned.
Absolutely. Yeah, well, I'll dig in. I'm gonna share my screen for those of you that can see it. And I'll kind of start with just a basic overview, help you a little bit understand who CAR is. We're a nationwide company. We work from coast to coast, much like Cirrus does. And the kind of our catch line is to help maximize your profitability through real estate. So we are licensed in all 50 states. Not many firms of any type of real estate can say that, but we have even the North Dakotas and the West Virginias of the world. We're able to help in any market, and we have agents on the ground in the vast majority of those markets as well. So um, before we kind of get into how to find the space, I'd love to talk a little bit about what the importance of real estate is to your practice. I can't recall, Jason, if you said it right now or on this call or just before, but real estate truly is the second highest expense in most offices. There are some specialties, perio, some of the supplies get up there a little bit higher, but certainly the second highest fixed expense. And it's also the most negotiable. So a lot of times, especially in leases, vast majority of clients that we see across the country do lease their spaces, but it is market by market, certainly. But after years of escalations, a lot of times we see those leases, especially over the last, between 2008 and 2018, the market corrected pretty strong. And so a lot of times what we found is in 2018, the rate was quite a bit above market. We've seen even over the last 5 years, we've seen a huge fluctuation in market. A lot due to COVID and government money put into the system, and so there's always a huge ability or possibility rather for fluctuations, and so this is definitely an expense to pay attention to. Often, excuse me, oftentimes you also only get one chance every 5 to 10 years to negotiate it. So it's really important that when that chance comes up, that you have a strong strategy to ensure you get the best terms. So properly or poorly negotiated lease can either cost or benefit a practice to the tunes of tens or even hundreds of thousands of dollars over that term of the lease. And it's really important to understand. I think a lot of doctors have a good understanding of what happens or when they go to school, especially you get a lot of clinical knowledge, but there's a lot of times where people don't really get a ton in terms of the business side of things. And with you, many of our doctors are private practice owners, and these are some big decisions to be made. And so one important thing to understand is that in the negotiation, there are two separate sides. And so it's obviously very important to have a relationship, and you're not trying to take advantage of the other one by any means. But a lot of times what we see, in fact, our CEO started this company because he found that landlords were actually taking advantage of tenants, because especially on the healthcare side, because doctors have money and don't necessarily have representation. Our biggest competitor is not another real estate firm. It's not anybody else. It's actually the doctor doing the deals themselves. The other thing to note is that savings in real estate. So if we were able to save you $70,000 over the term of your lease, that's net savings to your practice. What would it take in terms of production for you to make $70,000? A lot of times, if you're looking at easy numbers, if you're looking at a 25% profit margin, that means I have to do quick math here, and I'm not great at it, but you'd have to produce $280,000 to make that same savings that you could find in the real estate. So I hit on some of this, and I may get ahead of myself every once in a while. I've done this presentation a few times, but the same thought. When you bill a dollar, you don't keep a dollar. There are expenses that need to be paid. And so at that 20 to 40% profit margin, if we're able to save $150,000 to $200,000, that can be a seven-figure savings in terms of what production would be needed over a 10-year term. So making sure you have a good strategy can give you a exponential impact on your profitability. This terminology, I'm going to let Jason hit the majority of this, but there are so many different things that are important for you to consider that not even we necessarily negotiate on. A lot of times we're not looking at a an assignment clause as closely. If you're, 29 years old and doing your first practice, the assignment is a little ways out, and that there is some equity within the negotiation with everything that you ask. And so there is a separate transaction that takes place. That's where Cirrus is really shines. They have handled many where they handle the business points as well from the the negotiation perspective, but where they really shine, and we've talked about it recently, is looking at some of the relocation clauses and competition, how making sure you have exclusivity and that it's solid. Jason, I think, is going to hit on some more of that, so I won't spend too much time there. But the point is, terminology is very, very important within your lease. Another thing that we run through often is it more beneficial to lease? Sometimes ownership does make sense. And a lot of times what happens is when we look at options, there are considerations of would it make sense to own real estate? Many markets, it's not feasible. And that's why, again, 75 to 90%, depending on the market. If you're in Manhattan, obviously you're probably not, you're not likely owning real estate. But similar here in Nashville, I'm not sure where all of our listeners are from, but the Nashville market, Matt was telling me about a client that he's working with where ownership may not be a feasibility because they're in that Brentwood area. And so land is expensive and buildings come very few and far between. And so is it always better to lease? Maybe, but a lot of times I think doctors get set or their mind set on owning, and there's a lot of times where that does not make sense. And so it can affect your cash flow. Making sure that you have enough for a down payment, a lot of times is where doctors, it's not even an option when you consider what the bank's going to require. Short-term versus long-term. Many times doctors think I'm just going to sell the real estate to whoever buys the practice. Well, many banks are not able to do that type of deal. And so do you have a desire to be a landlord? Because there's a high likelihood that you will be. And with that, does it make sense? If you're going to be a landlord anyways, are there better ways for you to make income outside of owning the building that your practice is in? So many different considerations. It's important to weigh all of those options. But this transaction opportunity, we're going to spend a lot of our time today on lease renewals because that's what we discuss most often. But there are tons of opportunities in terms of transactions. A lot of these first ones, the startups, relocations, purchases, additional offices, there is a thought of, hey, I need to have a real estate agent because I need somebody to help me find real estate. But if you'll notice these bottom two options, a lease renewal and practice transitions, those are actually the two most common transactions in dental real estate. The lease renewal, I would say for every relocation or new lease done, there's probably 7 to 12, maybe even lease renewals happening. And a lot of times docs don't even recognize that there is an opportunity when that lease comes up for renewal for you to renegotiate those terms. And you really do owe it to yourself to make sure that you're still within market. I always equate it to Verizon. Could be said as well of DirecTV back in the day. They always got me with Sunday Ticket. So they would offer the Sunday Ticket thing and say, hey, you're for $20 a month you can get it as long as you sign a 2-year deal. And then when that next year comes up and they say, hey, by the way, you owe $120 a month now. You're like, what on earth? And you call them and they say, hey, you signed up for it. And you say, awesome. Well, let me talk to the cancellation department. And they're like, wait a minute. And they will work with you because they don't want to lose you as a client. Much more so in terms of the landlord's case. A lot of doctors think, I don't want to mess anything up. I want to make sure that I'm not offending the landlord, when in reality, the landlord's being very offensive with the terms that they're offering you. And so having a correct posture, which we'll dig into a little bit here, is very important. Practice transitions, that's one I'm not going to spend a ton of time on, but there's definitely an opportunity there. And there are so many times where there is a big miss when it comes to the real estate. So commercial real estate overview, I'm not going to spend a ton of time here, but there are definitely different types of properties. You've got office. We have many dentists in office spaces. Retail is very common, especially for general dentists. We even see orthos and pedos going a lot into retail type centers for high visibility, going direct to the consumer. Medical office buildings, you don't run into it much, maybe for an oral surgeon, maybe a prosthodontist. And then hospital campuses, hardly at all. Same thing though with maybe an oral surgeon needs rights for facial whatever purposes in terms of hospital rights. But there are so many different considerations and pros and cons of each. Signage is not something that you're going to find in a hospital campus, whereas retail, it's very high. And so if signage and exposure are important to you, same thing with access and parking, a lot of times retail does make sense. Whereas office might have better amenities. Sometimes the costs are significantly cheaper depending on the market. Natural light and windows, that's not something that you're going to get a ton in retail space. They have oftentimes what we call a shotgun space where you have maybe a retail front where there's good light, but then all the way back is just a shared wall with another tenant. And so you don't have a good ability to get light into the space where office makes sense a lot of times. And so sometimes if you're trying to do shade matching or anything that might require natural light, office might be something to consider a little bit more. And then synergy with other clients or other tenants. A lot of times if you get into an office building that has, optometrists and physical therapists, you might find synergies there. Same thing can be said of retail as well. One thing that we really like to press and make sure our clients understand is landlord motivations. It's only a deal if both parties are excited about it or both parties are willing to move forward. And so making sure that you're communicating, especially to the landlord, the points that you're negotiating and the whys behind it, it's really impactful to the deal to make sure that you can secure those terms because the landlord has motivations within the deal as well. And honestly, one of the things that we see often is doctors are negotiating really hard on maybe the base lease rate. And that's really honestly the area where landlords are least motivated to move because a lot of times with a landlord, the main thing that they're looking at is what you call the net operating income or the NOI. And so the lease rate is directly tied to the NOI. So a lower lease rate means a lower valuation on their property. Whereas they may give you only, 50 cents off in lease rate. They might give you $2 per square foot in terms of build out or free rent. And I'm sure everybody on this call understands that the cost of dental build out is extremely high. And so you're either going to be paying it to the bank and doing it yourself, and maybe the budget becomes a little more constrained at that point, or the landlord may be interested in giving you more concessions on the tenant improvement side, which will help you to not have to go to the bank and get it. And really, that's a line item deduction. Clarification, I'm not a CPA. I need to make sure that that's well known. But that expense, the rent expense, all of our CPAs say, hey, that's something that you can deduct completely. So you can actually even pay more in rent and have a savings overall depending on the other concessions. So it's really important to understand what the landlord is trying to achieve there. And you really need to know, this is where I think a lot of doctors go wrong as well. You're one of the most beneficial tenants that they can have in their building. So you need to make sure that you're getting a deal that expresses that. Another thing in terms of representation, a lot of professional landlords have representation themselves, yet a lot of healthcare providers, dentists specifically, are taking a DIY approach, trying to do it themselves when they're really the landlord. They may do hundreds of transactions in their career and they still hire representation. And the tenant, who might only do 3 or 4, does not have representation. So that's really the main reason our company started, is there was a huge imbalance with healthcare providers and the landlords they were negotiating against. And a lot of times they were doing it themselves. And so that's really kind of what started our company, is that imbalance and our CEO seeing it. In fact, he pushed back on he was a listing agent, and on his landlord, he said, hey, we're taking advantage of this client. And he said, either you do it or I'll find somebody who will, and hung up on him. And that's when I think our CEO recognized how dirty the game was being played. The other thing that is important to know is who's in the transaction. So if you drive by a Publix here in Middle Tennessee and you see a name in the window, you need to recognize that that person has a fiduciary similar to the relationship you would have with an attorney or with Cirrus or even with Carr, but they have the fiduciary to the other party. And that fiduciary requires them to get the best possible deal. So if you call and say, hey, I'm really interested in this property, your price just went up. So it's really important to have a strong posture going into the negotiation. And the biggest thing, again, is that the sellers are actually the ones, or the landlords in this case, are the ones who are paying for the fees. And so you actually should not be paying for your representation. Couple common misconceptions. Hiring an agent is going to cost me money. Our services are free to our clients. We'll never charge $1 a doctor. And honestly, in a lease renewal scenario, there are several opportunities where we don't get paid, but we're still happy to help because our hope is that you have other people that you've worked with and that you are going to tell them about our services. And so it's not really a free deal for us, although we may not get paid on the transaction, but the majority of time, the landlords are more than happy to pay to secure the good tenant. Another thing is not hiring an agent can save me money. If you go to a landlord and say, hey, cut 3% off this deal, and because I'm not bringing an agent, they're going to sign that lease that day because there are 15 to 20% concessions in a lot of cases. And that is 3% is nothing compared to what they'd be willing to do otherwise. Another one, my attorney it can handle the real estate side of the negotiation. Their attorneys are fantastic, and having an attorney that can negotiate the lease for you is imperative. And they have a very important part of the transaction. But knowing local knowledge of the market and what a landlord should be giving in terms of concessions is imperative as well. A residential agent, they don't deal with things like escalations, tenant improvements, free rent even. So a residential agent is not the best case. And then all commercial agents are the same. I could tell you story after story where we came in behind another commercial real estate agent who was not able to get the deal done. And it's simply because they don't understand a lot of times it has to do with the cost of the build out, but also just the value of you as a tenant. So everything is negotiable. Again, I'm not going to spend any time on this one because I think Jason may have some more insights into it, but there are several different things that you should be looking at. If you get solely focused on that base lease rate, it can definitely be a trap within the transaction. But we talk about posture. What is posture? Understanding what's at stake is really important to make sure that you are getting the best possible deal. And so if you are going into a transaction, again, that example of Publix saying, I really want this space, then you're not necessarily putting yourself in the best light because what you're telling the landlord is, I just want the space. Tell me what the terms are. And there's nothing wrong, by the way, with the landlords. A lot of times it can be seen as the landlord being a bad guy, but in reality, this is how they feed their family. If you put your house up for sale, you're not oftentimes going to put it up for the lowest amount that you would be willing to take. And if somebody came in and said they'd pay you more for it, I imagine you would take it. So we can't fault the landlords. You would likely take more for your home as well. And the biggest question that we get is what's fair market? Fair market, the best answer I have for that is what you're willing to pay. And so that's why having posture is important. So posture, what we tell tenants all the time is you got to have options, making sure that you know what's available in the market. Many times tenants say, hey, I don't want to move. And we say, that's fantastic, but we should go look still so that you can know what type of a deal you should be getting. And when we take you to the market in a renewal scenario, you don't want to move. We go look at options and come back to the landlord and say, hey, we'd be willing to stay, but we have deals that we're looking at elsewhere. The landlord's tune completely changes and you're going to get much better concessions than if you just go ask them for a good deal. So what are some questions landlords often ask? Does the tenant have a broker? If not, what that tells a lot of landlords is that you're not serious about the transaction because having a broker is something that they do. And again, they're the one paying the fees. If so, does the broker know the market? Do they have other viable options? If you haven't looked at other options, you don't know what fair market is. And they can scare you. There's a lot of tactics landlords will use, such as saying, hey, it's expensive to build out. They're not wrong. But unless you know what's available for you and have seen other options, that can be a scary thing for a landlord to say to you, and they're not wrong. Same thing with timing. If you only have a month left on your lease renewal, that's not a good place to be in. And so having viable options is important to be able to communicate to the landlord we know what we're doing. In a renewal situation, are they willing to move or are they willing to walk? If not, if the answer is no to that, then the landlord knows you're going to pay whatever they want you to pay. And then the last question they ask their broker is what's the most we can get them to pay? So the one thing that we talk about in the negotiation strategy, whoever has the most viable options wins. Meaning a lot of landlords, another tactic they use is saying, hey, we have other people that are interested in the space. And that's something that gets a lot of tenants worried. And so a lot of times if they can press you into a situation, time not being on your side, then a landlord might be able to get a better deal because they made you worried. So if the landlord thinks you can't move or that you won't move, they're going to be getting a better deal. Same thing, if you can communicate to them, I'm willing to move. If you're not willing to work with me, I have plenty of other landlords that are, then you're going to get the better scenario. And it's in the landlord's interest to give you the least amount of time possible in that scenario. So negotiation strategy, how long do these situations take? A new lease, we want to look at 9 to 12 months. There's a negotiation period. Cirrus is going to have their time that they're going to need to negotiate the lease portion. And then there's a build out period in many cases. And so 9 to 12 months is really what's needed. Same thing with a building purchase, different scenario, but similar timeline. In a renewal, why do we need 12 months? The reason is because we need to effectively communicate to the landlord that we can move and have other options elsewhere. If we can do that, it's going to put you in the best situation going into that transaction. Land purchase, not something that I think a lot of doctors realize when they get into it. It's not for the faint of heart. And those transactions can take a while. 18 to 24 months out is what we look for. And then an acquisition, 30 to 60 days is really all we need for that. So in closing, last thing I'd like to hit on, making sure that you have professional representation is really important. Ensuring that your agent doesn't have conflicts of interest. That's one thing that sets CAR apart. We don't have listings. You're never going to see our sign in a window. We'll never represent landlords. We only represent you as buyers and tenants. If there is an agent that you're working with that has listings in the area that fit your criteria, then they can't get you an unbiased opinion. So you want to make sure that the person you work with not only doesn't have listings, but can't take listings in your market. Having an expert track your dates is one of the biggest things that I would suggest. I'm sure Jason could tell you plenty of horror stories, I know I can, of doctors who missed their lease dates, their renewal dates, and end up in a sticky situation. And then giving yourself enough time. You don't want to reach out 3 months out because the landlord knows you're not going anywhere. You can't do anything in 3 months. Your best case scenario is a short-term renewal at that point. And then understanding your market. Going to market is how you know what fair market is. You can't possibly know otherwise. Even if I pull lease comps, those lease comps are for financial planners and Pizza Huts. You're a different type of tenant and you should be getting different concessions. And the only way you can know that is to negotiate elsewhere. And then making sure your agent has a solid game plan for success. That's one question I would always ask my agent if I were you is, how are you going to ensure that I get the best deal? And if they can't give you a good answer, then they may not be the agent for you. A lot of times in commercial, it's kind of a point in a chase situation. Most commercial agents, because 75% of their book of business is listings, they don't know how to handle a lease situation on the buyer or tenant side. And in doing so, when you say, I want this property, they say, let me go negotiate on it. And that's not the best way to get a good situation for yourself going into that lease renewal. So info on the last screen here is Matt Robertson. He's the local agent here in Nashville and can help anybody in this Tennessee area. But I don't know, Jason, maybe we want to go through you and then open up for questions at the end, or I'm happy to answer them now. You tell me what's best.
Yeah, absolutely. Why don't I show my screen here as far
Okay.
as what Cirrus's role is in regards to, well, helping find the ideal space. Now, first of all, to back up a little bit, thank you for presenting that. There's a ton of info here, and one of the key things that I took away from what you said was doctors need absolutely as much representation as possible when it comes to dealing with the landlord, or if they're about to be a landlord. The key piece is what information are they working with to make an informed decision as far as leasing a space or buying a space. The key thing is who's got the information and who's looking out for your best interests here. And this is exactly why Cirrus got started 30 years ago. It was a group of dentists that, frankly, they were tired of being pushed around by their landlords. So they got together with some real estate professionals to, let's say, have a better understanding and form a group that has the doctors back when it comes to representing them in regards to the all-important real estate transaction. So we have large swath of coverage throughout North America, throughout Canada and the US, and we represent more or less 500 doctors every year throughout North America. In terms of the data that we're working with, we've got a huge synergy with CAR because they're providing a lot of that real estate data. We've also got, through our proprietary data, we've got 95 billion square feet of real estate tracked throughout North America at the moment, with 1.5 million listings available. So while CAR can certainly help you with some of the space finding, what we can do is with our software, we can help basically determine what the market looks like alongside them and get a sense of what you're working with as far as base rents, vacancies, and also getting an understanding of what the opportunity is as far as your individual deal in that particular market. You know, what I had in a recent meeting was a discussion surrounding vacancies and the opportunity to potentially vacate your current space. And what we determined is, you know, this absolutely plays a huge role as far as the new landlord's willingness to take you on, but it also has a large part to play as far as negotiating with your current landlord to keep you on as a tenant. So these are certainly some of the things that we utilize here to help you determine, along with some of the other data here, such as vacancies, supply and demand trends, sale trends, having a determination of what's coming up in terms of new builds, in terms of overall market saturation, what's being constructed right now as far as that space. Certainly, this is much more of Carr's realm, but what we do here is we utilize the software to work alongside them to determine, is this space that you're looking at going to be a viable home for the next 5, 10, 15 years? The effort here, of course, is if we're looking to find a new space for your clinic, we want to be a part of your professional team. And certainly there's a number of players that will be needed here in order to create and formulate this final plan, which is having a fully built out dental clinic. So the first thing we definitely want to do is certainly align your finances with the location source. We have to work with a budget. We have to then, work alongside Carr to determine what's going to work as far as the space. Is the space going to be zoned correctly for a dental clinic? What's the layout going to look like? With conversations through the landlord, what's their willingness to have a dental tenant or a medical tenant, for that matter, as the tenant in their space? What's the build out going to look like? We'll also work alongside contractor to determine if, for example, the space requires a medical grade HVAC unit. Does the space accommodate for that? Does the space accommodate for a generator if need be? If it's a condo unit, for example, does the floor need to be raised in order to accommodate for the plumbing? A lot of the pieces here regarding your professional team, their input will be required to be reflected in the lease. And that's our role here, is to determine alongside Carr, is the space going to be viable for you, for your dental clinic? Also, in terms of where we fit into this space, certainly, someone like Carr, your dental specific attorney or accountant, they'll all have their role to play here. Our primary focus is certainly to work alongside your broker to, one, go through the spaces and determine is it going to be the right fit for you. But more importantly than that, what are you going to be paying in the space, and what's the future going to look like for the clinic over the next 10, 15 years in terms of what we look for as far as what we want out of the lease. There's certainly a number of items here that we'd want to do to make this effort as successful as possible. First of all, is to formulate the plan. The plan being demographically, what are you looking to have as your customer base? What's the growth look like in the area? Certainly Carr can help you with that. Also, additionally, we want to make sure that you absolutely have the right team to work alongside you when it comes to this effort. What I find quite frequently is that many dentists, they will choose, for example, their local attorney that helped them with their wills and estate planning. And they may choose a broker that helped them find their home. They may look to find a contractor that helped them build out their basement, finish their basement. And frankly, when it comes to an effort like this, when it comes to building a dental office, you really want people that have had extensive experience with dental and medical, such as Carr, such as Cirrus, and others. So we can definitely help you formulate the correct team to assist you with that. So that alongside items like site selection, certainly CAR can assist you with that to determine, okay, what's the viability of the space. Once the space is determined to be a good fit in terms of demographically, in terms of budget, in terms of what you want out of the space, we can then begin some discussions, initial discussions with the landlord to determine what's the landlord's willingness to have you as a tenant, what they're willing to offer to have you as a tenant. What we found throughout COVID was, frankly, the dental tenant is the best tenant on the planet. And we want to emphasize that in conversations with the landlord. Now, in addition to setting up the initial drawings and negotiating the lease, we want to make sure that, you know, all the pieces in terms of construction and what's required out of the space, what's required in terms of the layout, they all reflected in the lease. And that's all before you open the doors. In terms of some of the key financial variables, you know, Mike had alluded to this a little bit earlier, but we really believe that there's 7 key main financial variables to work on when it comes to making the space the right fit for you. Making sure that, you know, certainly if there's a new build to be had, what we find is upwards of $250 a square foot, depending on your area, as a build out cost. That's pretty common. And if you're looking at 2,000 square feet, it's certainly no small sum when it comes to building out a space. So we want to be able to manage the expenses as much as possible. Certainly, we'd want to look at your base rent and how it fits in with the rest of the market. We do find that dental tenants tend to pay a bit of a premium depending on if the space is built out or not, if it already has some existing plumbing. But again, one of the big things is dental tenants are the best tenants on the planet. You know, typically what we find is if you're going to build out a space with a new landlord and it's completely new space, the likelihood that that practice will stay there for extended duration is quite high. What we find is it's an average 26.5 years. So from the landlord's perspective, your build out, your tenancy in the space can represent a 26.5 year paycheck to them, right? So having a discussion early on about what the base rents will look like will be very important alongside the annual increases. Common area maintenance is a very interesting one as well. And we believe that this is also a sometimes overlooked financial variable when it comes to lease negotiation. Now, that's not to say that we're going to negotiate what your garbage fee will be in the space or your snow removal, but there's certainly a number of items that we can potentially add into the lease to add added accountability when it comes to the common area maintenance, but also with your base rent and your annual increases, there's an expectation that your rent will increase every few years or every year, whatever the case may be. Your common area maintenance typically will go up as well. But what we can have a discussion about is potentially having a cap as far as those increases. What if those common area maintenances are capped at, let's say, increasing in no more than 8% a year, for example, or 5% a year, whatever the case may be. Again, to secure your tenancy in the space with the landlord, these are quite common items that we would work on. So similarly, in terms of that discussion, in terms of securing yourself as a long-term tenant in the space, what we'd want to work on is making sure that you have ample time to build out the space. So that's a very big piece of the picture. You know, what we find is in terms of the build out, 3 to 6 months on average is what I get from our contracted partners as far as the time to build out space. And simply put, we'd want to see as much time as possible for you as a tenant, especially if you're telling the landlord, look, I'm looking to stay here for the next 10, 20 years, 4 to 6 months on top to make sure that you have ample time to build is, in our opinion, it's not unreasonable. But in addition to that, a free rent period can certainly be discussed after you've opened the doors. You know, if you're looking to open a new clinic and there may be no cash flow initially, there's no patients, well, the landlord can certainly provide a bit of an assist by providing a free rent period. We recently did a expansion for another doctor, and they've been a tenant in that space for about 8 years. They took on an additional 2,000 square feet, and as part of the extension of that lease and taking on that adjacent space, we're able to achieve 6 months of free rent as a result to secure that extra tenancy for the landlord. So, you know, again, the key things are, if you're looking to sign a lease in a space that is 5-10 years plus, certainly doesn't hurt to try to have the landlord assist their newfound, potentially very successful tenant. Additionally, tenant improvement allowance. This is something that we always we battle with, let's say, because it's a big discussion to be had, especially for those that are looking to do a new start. Having the landlord provide additional money to help you build can be huge, can be absolutely huge. So it can be very tempting to take on that additional money. The key piece, though, is that it's very important to note that landlords are not in the business of loaning money. They're in the business of providing you a space. And the key question is, if they're providing you additional money, where's the money coming from? If they're providing tenant improvement allowance, a lot of times it can get baked back into the rent. So that potentially, you know, if you're taking on additional improvement allowance, you may see an increase in rent. Is that good or bad? Well, it really depends on the situation, because if you're looking to do a new start and you've got student loans and, you know, everything else, that additional money may be absolutely critical to you. But it's very important to note that there is a relationship here between taking on additional tenant improvement allowance and the rent increasing. And there can be a balance that can be struck there between, you know, having sufficient amount of tenant improvement allowance without increasing the rent significantly. Now, there's also another piece that can be added in here, which is landlord work. If you're looking to negotiate a new lease and we've got a space that, you know, it's older and could use some work, again, if we're going to secure a long-term tenancy for you and for the landlord, it can be discussed where the landlord can pitch in money of their own. Essentially, they're indicating to you that they'll do some of the improvement for you. They'll pay for it themselves. We recently did a renewal for another doctor, and as part of the renewal to secure a longer term tenancy, a 10-year term, we had the landlord replace the air conditioning unit, the $15,000 air conditioning unit. So again, even in a renewal, there's a lot to be had. But, you know, if you're looking to do a new build, new start, the key things are you're providing the landlord with a significant paycheck, and there's a lot that can be had as a result in the negotiation. The way to illustrate this is, well, we look at the typical lifespan of a dental clinic, and if you have $5,000 as a example rent increasing at 3% a year, it's important to note it's not just $5,000 over the span of 30 years. This equates to $2.9 million as a paycheck to the landlord. So I emphasize this, not to scare you, of course, but it's to emphasize that, you know, we're doing two things when we're paying the rent. We're securing our own tenancy in the space, and we're also paying the landlord. And as an inducement to have us sign a potentially long-term lease with the landlord, there's a lot that can be had in a discussion here. So some of the key things that we'd want to watch out for while we're dealing with the landlord is some of the landlord's traps, both in terms of time, but also in terms of the language that may be set up here. So in terms of the typical timeline of a lease, you may get a 10-year lease, part of your initial start with 2 5-year options. But it's very important to note as well, especially when it comes time to renewal, it's very important to note the critical dates. If your lease is, let's say it's set to expire the end of this year, it's very important to approach the landlord not at the time that the lease is expiring. You need to have enough time to set up a correct plan, a correct approach when it comes to the landlord. Simply put, if you were to approach the landlord too late, let's say a month before the expiry, there's a couple of things that can happen. One of the things that can occur is that the landlord may be able to present to you a new standard form lease with new rent, which would definitely put you in a detrimental position as far as the financials are concerned, but also in terms of the legal language. So we find that the ideal time to approach the landlord is 1 to 2 years before the expiry, and that is in order to formulate that plan, gather all the data, and create the correct strategy to approach the landlord. Again, the key pieces when it comes to this is you need the time to have that leverage. You are definitely the best tenant on the planet as a dental tenant, but you need to put yourself in the landlord's shoes as well. If you approach the landlord too early with the incorrect data, as Mike had indicated earlier, that puts you in a position where the landlord's representatives can certainly take advantage of it. So what we'd want to do is plan the approach, prepare with all the correct data, and also prioritize what the high priority items are as far as what you want in the space, the medium priority items and the low priority items. Now, Mike had alluded to this a bit earlier. Certainly there's a lot of pros when it comes to acquiring a building or a plot of land to build upon. One of the things that we always discuss with our doctors is what's better. And I can candidly say there's really no correct approach as far as this is concerned. To each their own, but there's a lot of things to consider. Certainly, if you're looking to buy a building, you'll have the flexibility to determine how the space is controlled and the layout and so on, but it obviously will require a much larger financial investment, especially for those that are looking to build their first clinic. It is advisable to lease first because it requires a much smaller upfront cost. Also, what we find is if we're dealing with the Heartlands of the world or the Aspens of the world, we find that more often than not, they don't own any real estate because, well, certainly what we like to discuss is the lease needs to align with your plans for the clinic and the business. In the case of the medium and large size DSOs, for $1 million or $2 million they spend buying a building, that's $1 or $2 million they're not using to build another clinic or to buy another clinic. So there's a lot to be said about that. Certainly, Carr can walk you through that as far as what would be best for your particular area. But in terms of the lease, whether you're buying or you're going to be leasing from someone else, the lease absolutely plays a critical role here as far as the success of the business. Some of the key pieces here, well, you'll see here, there's over a dozen items, which I'll spend the next 4 hours going through ad nauseum with you. No, I'm just kidding, guys. We won't have to do that. What we typically do is we want to touch on some of these items alongside everything else that may be presented in the lease that, frankly, as a dental tenant, as a dentist, you may not have thought of. I get this quite frequently when I talk to doctors that just came out of school. The hours they spend talking about business in dental school is zero, right? And this is the key piece here. When you're dealing with Carr and Cirrus, I can certainly speak for Cirrus. We've got 30 years of experience in dealing with all these terms and more, and the interactions of these terms with your business. Some of the ones that we certainly look for in the largest city centers are demolition clauses and relocation clauses. The landlord's ability to potentially move you from one space to another or demolish the building and put up a shiny new condo. But there's also other ones that are, let's say, more innocuous, that belong in more of a commercial specific lease rather than a dental specific lease. Items like financial statements, usage provisions, and heck, even personal guarantees. We run into those quite frequently. One of the ones I wanted to touch on here was the usage provision. So this is one of the critical ones, frankly, for a dental clinic. What this line determines in a lease is your ability to practice what you want to practice in the particular space. It will outline what services you're providing. It even can outline if you can expand your area of practice. You know, if you're a general dentist and you're looking to do ortho, what does this line say about this at the moment, right? And also, it has synergy with a line that can be discussed later, which is called exclusivity, which provides you with effectively a non-compete within the building or within the premises for that particular usage. Where this can benefit you is certainly having that exclusivity, but where this can be detrimental is, frankly, if it's not clarified enough as far as what you can do with the space. We had this happen quite recently with a client of ours where their lease, which we didn't have a part in initially with negotiating, it was quite broad. Let's say it's quite general as far as their usage. It only indicated that they're allowed to practice dentistry. The problem came up in that their business partner wanted to open an ortho clinic in the same plaza. And the problem therein lies that from the landlord's perspective, dentistry, whether it's ortho or prosthodontics or pedodontistry, it's all the same. So because of their current usage and their exclusivity over dentistry, their business partner was not allowed to open a clinic. So that's, it depends on your individual plan, right? But, you know, these are some of the items that we'd want to touch on to make sure that, again, the lease aligns with your particular plans for the clinic for the next 10, 20, 30 years. Another big one that we'd certainly want to touch on is, especially in Nashville, alongside some of the other bigger city centers like Manhattan, Miami, and so on, is the demolition clause. This clause, what it allows to do is to have maximum flexibility as far as what happens to the building. If they decide to sell to a developer, what it allows them to do is, well, the developer can indicate to you as the tenant that they want to demolish the project, and it may allow them to terminate your lease given 180 days notice. So the problem here, of course, is if you're about to sign a lease for 5 or 10 years and you're about to have a substantial bill for the build out and the equipment, and you're putting your blood, sweat, and tears into the space, we simply don't want the landlord to dictate whether your stay is cut short by their own plans. So having a discussion about this particular line is extremely important. Now, first of all, in terms of the typical language that we see in a demolition clause, the notice period here in the middle section where it says the landlord can provide you 180 days notice. That's a critical piece because, as Mike had indicated earlier, the process of getting from deciding that you want to open a space to actually opening the doors, this can take upwards of a year, potentially more. If you have only 180 days notice to vacate, this simply is not enough time to find a new space. And if your practice that you spent the last 5 years building up, they suddenly left in limbo while you're finding a new space, what happens to the patients? So that's a huge piece as far as what we look out for in terms of demolition. But in addition to that, the landlord may opt to add in language pertaining to providing some reconciliation or payments associated with your leasehold improvements. But we find that's typically quite minimal, especially when we're talking about spaces that are 1,500, 2,000 square feet, 3,000 square feet. when build outs are upwards of $250, $300 a square foot, it's a paltry sum. The cost of this mistake, down the line is potentially quite significant. If you're looking to make this your forever home and you're eventually looking to hang up your hat here and sell the clinic, what we found is that when dealing with some of the larger practice brokerages, those that assist in selling the clinic, demolition costs can be severely impactful to the value of the clinic, upwards of $300 to $350 a square foot. Not only that, but it can be quite a deterring factor when it comes to financing. So if you're looking to acquire a practice, or if your buyer's looking to acquire your practice, this may be in the way of them receiving financing in order to purchase this. So that's of course, in addition to having a landlord cut your stay a bit short. So what we find is that, well, when this mistake can cost you upwards of $250,000 to $750,000, we certainly want to nip this in the bud right from the start. It's much easier to have this conversation in the beginning when you're, let's say, bringing the big bag of money to landlord to build out the space, rather than down the line. Now, as far as when to get started, again, I alluded to this earlier. There is a sweet spot as far as dealing with the landlord and discussing any kind of lease negotiation. If you're in the space already, we always recommend to start as early as possible, typically 24 months before, and that's because if you're an existing tenant in the space and you approach the landlord 5 years before the expiry, they simply have no interest in negotiating terms when they have you locked in for such a duration. But like Mike had indicated earlier, if it takes upwards of a year to find a new space, negotiate the lease, build out the space, and finally move in, landlords definitely have an understanding of that as well. So it's advisable to begin the process of renegotiating your lease 1 to 2 years before the expiry. And this, of course, is as politically as I can put it, because landlords understand this. Landlords understand what can happen when you decide to look elsewhere for a space. So, we want to have maximum leverage here as far as your approach, and definitely starting early, having time is one of the critical pieces here. Now, as far as the process of negotiating a lease, whether you're looking to do a new start or renew, this is especially important when it comes to doing a new start, is gathering all the data, gathering all the documentation, having understanding of what the landlord's looking for, what the market is like, what the demographics, through CAR, what they're saying about the area, what the growth is like, determining, what's coming up as far as what's being built, but also identifying what's important for you as far as your clinic, aligning the data with your individual goals. After that, what we want to do is, once we have determined an ideal space for you, something that fits in terms of your demographics, in terms of what you're looking for out of the space, we want to be able to review all the documentation from the landlord side and review any potentially draft lease from the landlord to highlight any potential red flags that may be within it. And of course, prepare all the market data to make that initial approach as concise as possible. Notice here that we still haven't talked to the landlord yet. We're still creating a strategy here to approach them. Only up until we have all the data and formulate the plan will we begin to discuss the lease terms and, of course, the financial terms with the landlord. Once we have that all back, what we want to do is review the final documents to ensure that everything that we have discussed with the landlord is absolutely consistent with what you're looking for out of the space. So as far as this conversation is concerned, the big piece here is we're here to help. And in terms of how we can help, as part of the attendance to the webinar, we are offering a complimentary review of your documents, if you have documents today, or if you're looking to look at a space, determine what's out there in the market, we can set up a consultation with Matthew and Mike to go through what's in your particular area, and also, you know, once you've identified what's correct for you, what's available for you in terms of the space, we can have a discussion about some of the documents and highlighting potential red flags here within. Now I'll leave it open for any questions here. Mike, Matthew, your thoughts on what we've discussed here as far as some of the opportunities to work together and help our doctors out here.
Yeah, I think, this is something that, I think we need to make doctors more aware of so they know, hey, what are the pitfalls? What are the things they need to be aware of that they might not be? The demolition clause was a great example of that, right? There's another clause that I don't know the exact term of it, but, if they pass away before their lease is up, that's something else that, we want to think about so they're not on the hook for that lease for, 8 years or whatever it is, and their family's got to deal with that financial issue that comes with that. So these are all things that you want to make sure you're protected when going into these negotiations.
Yeah, absolutely. Ton of great synergy. I think there's very particular roles that we each fit or fill, but there's definitely good overlap, which is a great thing that you would love to see to make sure that we're able to help each other out and take a peek with our local knowledge and your experience and as many leases as you've done. I think doctors would be well served by having both parties, I think, on the team.
Absolutely. And I think, Mike, you said it best. Don't approach the landlord alone. Like, definitely have the correct people alongside you to assist with this, because, I mean, let's face it, landlords negotiate leases all day, right? This is their bread and butter. And when it comes to dentists and dentistry, I certainly don't want to reach into a toolbox and get the channel lock pliers to do the extraction, right? I
Yeah.
want to trust people that have done this on a day-to-day basis, and have done this for years and years to do this for me. And I think just the same when I'm looking for a new space to relocate my practice or to build my own practice. I certainly want to talk to people at CAR, and I certainly want to have, of course, I'm tooting my own horn here, but certainly someone like us at Cirrus to look over the lease agreement to make sure that, well, you're signing something that's favorable to you for the next foreseeable future, 10, 15, 20 years.
Yeah, one thing too that I see as we wrap up here is the idea of the doctor having a good relationship with the landlord and thinking, I don't want to mess anything up and make them, frustrated with me or whatever. I've had a lot of doctors bring that up, and many of them, when they sign on, they say one of the best things was that I could tell the landlord, listen, this is not an area of expertise for me. I appreciate you working with my team and helping me figure out so I can make sure that I'm taking care of my practice, just like you want to take care of your real estate. And so we almost, I think both of us can provide a bit of a buffer as well for those situations. Just because you have a good relationship with your landlord, we've seen it time and again where landlords go to all of their properties and have dentists in it, and they get checkups twice a year at each one. It's maybe $300, but they build that relationship and then make it harder for the tenant to want to push back much in terms of those negotiations. So we can be a buffer as well. I think that's another great aspect for both parties.
Absolutely. And heck, one of the key things to note is dentists are busy.
Yeah,
These are exceedingly busy. So, your time, frankly, your time is much better spent chairside rather than dealing with the landlord.
Yep.
But on that note, we're here to help, and we're happy to assist, and we're ready to assist in any way we can. And thanks everyone for spending the hour with us, and have a great night.
Thanks for the opportunity, Jason. Good to meet you guys.
Good talking to you. Take care.